Pretty much everyone agrees that God Hand is a good game, but as much as people will repeat the idea that God Hand is good, I can't help but wonder how many of these people actually understand why God Hand is a good game in the first place, like what about its design makes it visionary. And as much as I love God Hand, I can't help but wonder how much of its newly hailed status has more to do with trendy internet discussion than it does this legion of God Hand appreciators. I think it's mostly people sort of collectively recognize this was a game that was good, that was designed well, that was not treated fairly by IGN and other game critics, and that it deserves to be treated with respect, which I do appreciate, but I also think it is worthwhile to play the game and discuss, okay, what is it actually doing that's really good? A really funny example of this is that recently IGN went back and sort of updated their position and stance on God Hand because their infamous 3 out of 10 review has become kind of a black mark on their journalistic record, as many as there are. This one really stands out. So they went back and said, you know what? God Hand is actually cool now that we think about it. But what's funny, if you go through the actual revised review of God Hand and the discussion of the game, it's clear that they don't really understand why the game is good. And in fact, what they do is basically just compare it to Sekiro and say, yeah, it's like Sekiro and it's deep and stuff and it's got customizable moves. Isn't that cool? And as funny as it is that they use Sekiro instead of Dark Souls to avoid the outright meme of them always comparing games directly to Dark Souls, I think Sekiro is even less accurate of a comparison because when it comes to action game design, I cannot think of a game further away from Sekiro than God Hand. Yes, they have some very slim surface similarities with the evade system, but other than that, they are absolutely nothing alike. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile to begin this review by discussing where God Hand comes from. Like, what is this game going for? What is its lineage? And in my opinion, you can trace God Hand's design back to 2 different things. The first is 2D beat-em-ups, especially Final Fight. And from what I understand, Mikami was actually directly inspired by Final Fight and by Final Fight Streetwise when making God Hand. And what I mean by inspired is that he saw Final Fight, loves it. He saw Final Fight Streetwise and went, no, that's mess. That's not how you're supposed to do it. If you want to make a proper 3D Final Fight, this is how you do it. And that is God Hand. God Hand is a proper 3D beat 'em up. That is one of the branches of its lineage. The other branch of its lineage is clearly 3D fighters like Virtua Fighter and Tekken. If you take these 2 branches of game design and put them together, 3D fighters and 2D beat 'em ups, essentially what you get is God Hand. And that is what it's going for. And in my opinion, it is like the true successor to the beat 'em up formula, much more so than something like Devil May Cry. God Hand is much better at capturing and recreating 2D beat 'em up design in 3 dimensions than pretty much any other game other than maybe Spike Out. But as much as I love Spike Out, I think it is clear that God Hand is the better, more revolutionary game. And God Hand is a really frustrating situation because when it came out, of course, it was mostly dismissed and misunderstood and derided as a bad game. And it didn't sell very well, and it was sort of made in this undercover bootleg fashion where it wasn't really a fully finished, proper release. And so because God Hand was a failure of a commercial product, I think a lot of its really cool, innovative design ideas were dismissed too early and dropped in favor of a more commercially viable action game design like Devil May Cry. But if God Hand had been successful and had been something that was well received and was taken more seriously, I think we could have got a really interesting alternative timeline where we had God Hand style games becoming a subgenre of action game, just like there is a subgenre of Devil May Cry style action games and now a subgenre of Dark Souls style action games. I absolutely believe that God Hand has the potential and material to create its own distinctive style of action game, basically 3D beat 'em ups in a true sense that could have went on and become something really cool. And I'll hear every now and again there are various action games that come out with a little bit of inspiration from God Hand and have little homages to God Hand or ideas from it. but nothing that I have seen has really captured and followed up on what this game has done. And so part of the goal of this review is not just to describe to you that God Hand is good, because like I said, this is pretty much consensus now, but rather to help you understand what modern action games could learn from God Hand and should incorporate from it. And so let's get to the core strengths of its game design. The first strength is the emphasis on real spacing and natural move balance. Real spacing is the interaction of hitboxes in space between you and your enemy. In a fighting game, this concept would be considered
footsies.
The idea is this neutral game of you sticking out hitboxes and your opponent sticking out hitboxes, and you have to interact and move around these hitboxes in real space. Like where you stand, where you move matters in terms of where the hitboxes are going and how you trade with them and everything like that. This sounds really obvious because it is fundamental, and it is something that most action games would just naturally emphasize and have for a very long time. Fighting games, beat 'em ups, shmups, all of these arcade genres are mostly based on real spacing and real interaction between you and your enemy. But in modern game design, this is becoming less and less of a foundation of action game combat, where you look at stuff like Batman Arkham Knight, or the Spider-Man game, or Sifu, or now Stellar Blade. A lot of these games are now trying to get around this whole gray area gradient of having to figure out getting around hitboxes and having to figure out the enemy hitboxes and what you do and how to place your hitboxes, because that's all complicated and nuanced, and forget all that. Where you look at stuff like Stellar Blade, yes, Stellar Blade has technically real space interactions, but because the enemy tracking is so massive and overwhelming, and because it has all these prescribed sort of responses like up dodge, down dodge, neutral dodge, parry, all this sort of stuff overrides the real spacing, where now if you watch people playing for no damage runs or fast completion runs or whatever, they're mostly just walking around and doing the prescribed follow-ups, because that is much more efficient and reliable than actually attempting to move around the hitboxes of these attacks with massive tracking. You'll see this a bit in Sekiro, you see this in Sifu. This is a big modern action game trend, and in fact, I believe the God of War developers have proudly given a term to this, which is suck to target.
To help with the jarring lateral suck problem, we scaled the range of suck to target depending on the target's angle to Kratos. The wider the angle, the lower the range. And we were pretty happy with the results. Some of the examples of suck to target in the video are obvious over large distances, but it's actually happening much more frequently than you might realize. As a fun fact, we actually toned down the suck distance dramatically for our hardest game difficulty, Give Me God of War, because we wanted players to pay more attention to their positioning in combat. Once again, I apologize. As a fun fact, we actually toned down the suck distance dramatically for our hardest game difficulty, Give Me God of War, because we wanted players to pay more attention to their positioning in combat.
Which means that the game is automatically placing you in the attack ranges for you. This sort of gray area of having to move around and place yourself in real space is now being eliminated, because that's difficult and complicated. And so God Hand, in contrast, is all about the real spacing, not only with the properties of the attacks and the fact that the attacks are so close quarters and so telegraphed and so easy to see with the size of the limbs, and because people are punching and kicking rather than using giant fire swords or splash damage and stuff like that. Like, everything is really clear and easy to understand hitbox wise. Then you also have the camera system, where you are pulled in with a really nice clear view of everything. You can see the hitboxes, you can see the attacks, and it's this great over the shoulder view where you can see what you're doing, you can see what the enemies are doing, and it's locked in and it's reliable. And you can even move away from enemies while facing them for that really precise positioning. This is something that God Hand is really good at, and why I think its over the shoulder camera is a lot better and more visionary than people give it credit for. But I'll talk about the camera system in detail a little bit later in the review. But the key is that God Hand is all about the real spacing, and the enemy tracking and enemy attacks are all very reasonable, they're all very avoidable, they're all very manageable. You don't have these sort of prescribed follow-ups that you have to do. And I know you might be thinking the evade system is like that, but it isn't. And I'll talk about the evade system here a bit as well. And so that is the first strength of real spacing, and paired with that is natural move balance, which brings us to the evade system. So what is natural move balance? Natural move balance is that the strengths and weaknesses of attacks and defensive options are based off the fundamental frame data of the move. That frame data is what determines if the move is good or not, or if you should use it or not. Again, this seems really obvious and simple, especially if you're used to fighting games, especially classic fighting games like
The Standing C in Guilty Gear,
where it's this big move with a big hitbox that comes out pretty quickly, is active for a while, is jump countable on hit and block, and has all these different utilities based off of its fundamental frame data. So this is going to be very familiar concept to fighting game players. But again, modern action game designs are getting away from this concept of natural move balance and instead are using statistical move balance. Stellar Blade, once again, where you have an attack and maybe that attack's natural frame data is unremarkable and it's not really that great, but the way you make it good is just by simply upgrading the statistical properties of the move, where now the move does 100 damage or whatever, and then it does 200 damage, then it does 300 damage, then it does 400 damage. So the move itself isn't fundamentally interesting or unique in the way it activates and the way it's on screen, but the statistical properties of the move is what makes it special. And this is what a lot of modern action game and RPG devs have turned to, because it's much easier to balance large masses of options and attacks and things based off of just using statistical tables and things like that. We even see this in fighting games now, like with Tekken's Heat system and with all these special systems they have going now with supers and heat and rage and all that sort of stuff. All of that is statistical balance. God Hand, however, keeps the properties of its moves natural for the most part. So the evade system is a great example of this. You have 4 different types of evades. You have the duck evade, the left evade, the right evade, and the back handspring evade, the back evade. All of these evades accomplish different things, but the difference with the evades and properties of God Hand versus a lot of modern action games would be that if you look at Stellar Blade, it has a similar system of an up evade, a down evade, a neutral evade, whatever, right? But the way it works in Stellar Blade is that these are all prescribed responses to the prompts of the enemy. There is one correct answer to up, to down, to neutral. The game is giving you a Simon Says little game of you press here, you press there, this is what you're supposed to do. This is statistical, forced, artificial sort of action design. This is not the way it works in God Hand at all. There is no prescribed evade you have to do when an enemy attacks you. You don't match up the evades to the enemy attacks. This was the misunderstanding of the reviewer at IGN when describing it like Sekiro. No, it's not like Sekiro. It's not like parries. It's not something you do that has to match up with the attack. Instead, in God Hand, the evade you use is determined by the context you're in and how much of a risk you're willing to take based on that context. So, for the example of a basic enemy attacking you, you can either duck dodge it, side dodge it, or back dodge it. The trade-offs of each of these is that a duck dodge has less iframes than the other ones, and you stay in place, so you're staying in danger with not many iframes, but the recovery is the fastest. So if someone's going for a single punch with a lot of lag on it, and you duck dodge it, then you're going to get a bigger punish on the enemy because you're right there and you're ready to punish, especially if you're going for counter hits. However, if the enemy's doing like a really big flurry of attacks that overlap on each other, then you can probably still duck dodge him because duck dodge is really good, but the risk is much higher, right? You have to duck dodge a lot of attacks in sequence with a lot of timing, and so you're taking a bigger risk there. Where if you back dodge it, now you're getting out of the reach of the enemy, so it's safer. And so the backhand spring is the safest dodge to use in a lot of cases because it has the most iframes and gets you out of danger mostly. but the trade-off is you're losing your offensive positioning, and if you have multiple enemies attacking you, you have recovery on that back handspring that lasts longer, so you could back handspring into some ugly counterattacks if there are more enemies nearby. And so there is a natural trade-off there where neither of them are always going to be the exact correct choice. It just really depends on what is happening on screen and what you need to happen. Same thing with the side dodges. The side dodges, from what I understand, have about the same amount of iframes as the duck dodge, but they take longer and they also move you a bit out of position. But the great thing about the side dodges is three-dimensional positioning is really important in this game, as I described earlier. Getting enemies to walls, getting out of walls, getting out of being surrounded. That side of it is actually really important and really useful for that, but it isn't something that's just prescribed in a sequence. It's a choice you make depending on the situation and depending on your knowledge of the gameplay system. And that style of an evade system is a lot deeper and more meaningful than just having prescribed prompts that you follow depending on what the enemy is telling you to do. I would think of the evade system of God Hand much more like a sidestep system in a 3D fighter, or like a backdash system in Tekken. It's actually really funny and interesting how much of a parallel there is between Tekken's movement system and God Hand's movement system. I would say they are extremely alike in how the sidestep functions and how the duck functions. And I believe there is even a Korean backdash style maneuver in God Hand. In a lot of ways, you can think of God Hand as a single-player Tekken beat-em-up. In fact, the game that looks the most like God Hand in terms of the way it plays is the Tekken Force mode of Tekken 4, which is really awesome. I can really see a lot of parallels here. They just needed to be bold enough to move that camera to the back of the Tekken 4 character in Tekken Force, and you could have got something really cool. So God Hand is basically a more well-developed Tekken Force mode in a lot of ways. And another strong quality of God Hand that modern action games could learn from is its dense level design and robust enemy design. And so beginning with the level design, there's a concept on this channel that I talk about all the time, and God Hand is really good at this concept, which is the idea of gameplay density. Basically cutting out all the filler and fat and garbage, I'm looking at you, Stellar Blade, and getting right to the core of the gameplay and developing that core gameplay over the course of the playthrough. And God Hand is really good at doing that. It starts off really fun already. Level 1, you're meeting full-on enemy AI, but it's giving you that nice curve and slide upward into the craziness of the later stages, but nothing feels too tutorialized. Nothing feels too hand-holdy, nothing feels too lame and boring. It's always a good sign of gameplay density when you boot up the game and you're already an expert at it, and stage 1 is still interesting and fun, and God Hand is really good at achieving that. Every time I restart the game, I always play stage 1 with a fresh set of eyes, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this now without taking hits or without dying too much. And so the game knows what it is. It knows what the player wants, and it develops that relationship. And then the second quality is the well-developed enemy design. God Hand has great enemies. And the enemies aren't just great because they're dangerous and difficult and hard. They're also great because they are dynamic. They have different behaviors, different patterns, different mix-ups. And then when they combine together, they create really nasty synergies that the player has to contend with and figure out. That is really great beat-em-up design, and that carries over into God Hand as well in the 3D beat-em-up sphere. For example, in a 2D beat-em-up like Fight and Rage, there are certain sections where the enemy whip girls are really not all that threatening when they're all by themselves in isolation, but you take those enemy whip girls and you just pair them with a few extra enemies and they become living nightmares. The same thing is the case in God Hand, especially when the demons spawn. You could have just a regular whip girl, then you have a demon spawn, and all of a sudden that regular whip girl is like a boss fight in terms of difficulty if you don't have God Hand meter, because you got to manage both of the enemies at once, and their different overlapping attacks and different overlapping patterns cause a lot of problems. And that's what's really cool about the enemy design of God Hand, where not only are the enemies dangerous, in isolation, they are extremely dangerous when they are paired up together. In order to deal with them being paired up together, you have to start engaging in the dynamics of the beat 'em up combat, like grouping enemies together, launching them together, trying to punch them together. That type of stuff is really well captured in God Hand in a way that it just isn't in something like Devil May Cry. So the enemy design of God Hand is freaking awesome. And so I'd now like to discuss my thoughts on some key features of the game. And the first key feature is, of course, the camera angle, the limited third-person perspective. That's what I like to call it. I've heard other people refer to this as tank controls and comparing it to tank controls, but it really is not tank controls because tank controls are independent of the perspective of the camera, and that is not the case here. You are still context sensitive to the perspective of the camera. It's just that the camera is always locked to the player's back. In fact, if you take a step back and think about it, I guess that's a little pun for you. If you think about it, this camera angle is one step away from an FPS camera. It's merely an FPS camera that's pulled to the character's back. That's all that it is. But it is an effective, very powerful camera angle because it gives you a lot of precision with your movement while giving you a clear field of view. There is a reason why the first-person camera angle is really popular and really prolific throughout game design, because it's really good, because it's really effective at accomplishing what it's trying to do. And I think that holds true here with God Hand, where what this camera angle is able to achieve is to give the player a lot of precision over his movement and attacks, while also creating a limitation in the player's field of view. And that limitation is really important because it creates a very important risk reward, where God Hand, your character is really good at one-on-one encounters. And for the most part throughout the game, even later in the game, if you can get an enemy, even a really dangerous enemy like a demon, separated and fight it one-on-one, you're usually going to be able to dispatch that enemy pretty well. But the second you introduce a second enemy into the equation, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more complicated and difficult to manage. But if you are able to just see around yourself in a 360 sort of view like you're able to do in Devil May Cry and a lot of modern action games now, that tension of being able to isolate and attack enemies one by one is pretty much removed, where you can see, oh, he's coming up behind me, they're going to counterattack me here. So what you could do is you separate them out. I do this in Devil May Cry all the time. And then you attack them in their little corner or whatever, and then you just wait for the other enemy to come in, and then you have your counterattack for that enemy. So there's no tension, there's no sort of enemy grouping challenge really being introduced. With a bird's eye point of view, it's almost always better to separate and divide and conquer the enemy groups, because you can see everything that's happening around you and you can prepare for counterattacks from enemies at your back. But in the case of God Hand, because you can't really tell what's going on behind you with a lot of detail, you have that little mini map that kind of gives you hints like, oh, they're coming in now, they're moving towards you. But I like how abstract that mini map is, because you either need to have a really deep knowledge of the enemy behavior to know exactly what the little movements of the mini map mean, or you just need to be prepared to figure out a way to get all the enemies grouped together in your field of view. And you'll find yourself doing this a lot more in God Hand than you would in other games, where getting everyone in the same area and in your line of sight is a very important tactic, just like it is in a 2D beat 'em up. In 2D beat 'em ups, it's all about grouping enemies together, and in God Hand, it's all about grouping enemies together, because it is just too dangerous to have a bunch of enemies surrounding you in your peripheral vision or behind your back. You need to be able to see everything, and the fact that you're limited in being able to see everything by having to put everyone in front of you is the point. It is actually really important to the design of the game and the combat that you cannot just see behind your back without committing to turning around. Just like in an FPS. Like I said in my Ghost and Goblins review, limitation in mechanics creates the opportunity for player skill, and I think tying together the player's movement with the player's perspective and vision is another way to emphasize the dynamic of real space interaction, which I think is really cool. Another important aspect of this game's design that not a lot of people talk about is the radical freedom of the evade canceling system. Being able to cancel attacks with evades in this game is the most free-form, permissive style of canceling I have seen in a very long time. I think only rivaled by maybe Bayonetta. And what I mean is that during an attack in this game, and pretty much all attacks, there are a few that you can't evade cancel, but pretty much all of them you can cancel at any point with an evade. So you go for a guard break, you can cancel that with an evade. You go for an uppercut, you can cancel that with an evade. You go for a heavy kick or a sweep, you can cancel that with an evade. And so what it allows you to be able to do is to be able to put out hitboxes and reposition yourself and get rid of the cooldown of a lot of attacks via the evade system. And this is a foundational skill for anyone playing God Hand for the first time. What you should practice doing the second you pick up the game is learning to evade cancel your moves. Jabs, no, because the cooldown on jabs isn't long enough to warrant that, though you could evade cancel a jab if you want. But rather, pretty much all other moves that have a longer cooldown, you can go ahead and cancel with either a forward duck dodge or a side dodge, depending on what you need to do, or back dodge if you're in danger. But the idea is that you can get rid of the cooldown of pretty much all of the moves via an evade. And what's really awesome about this and what makes it work so well is the problem with beat 'em up design and the problem with like action game design in 3 dimensions is that when you're trying to deal with multiple targets at once at a close range, you're going to run into the problem of overlapping attacks. So let's say you've got an opponent to your right, you've got an opponent to your left, you go to kick the opponent at your right, and as your kick is coming out, the guy to your left jabs you. This is a problem in 3D action games, especially because you can't control everyone as cleanly as you can in a 2D style beat 'em up. In a 2D style beat 'em up, because of the perspective, you're able to lock down multiple opponents at once with your attacks and jabs. So you don't have to worry about people overlapping attacks other than if someone's on the other side of you, and that's that whole meta there. But in a 3D action game, in a 3D beat 'em up, you could have 2 opponents in front of you, and you still can't lock both of them down with the same attack. There are some attacks in God Hand you actually can with like that sweeping kick, but other than that, if you're going for multiple opponents, you can't lock up multiple opponents at once. And so what this free canceling system allows is you to be able to cancel a committed attack in order to address oncoming attacks. Pretty much all good action games deal with this question one way or another. So in
Devil May Cry,
you can pretty much jump cancel out of everything, and your jump has iframes. And so if you have a situation in Devil May Cry with overlapping attacks, you just jump out of it, which works. It is a solution. But I think God Hand's solution is actually more interesting because rather than jumping out of the situation and just like, hey, I'm just getting the hell out of here, or getting above them and attacking them from above, which is the whole meta of Devil May Cry in a lot of ways. In God Hand, you got to keep your ass on the ground. There is no jump. You've got to deal with the situation in front of you, and the way you have to deal with that situation in front of you is you got to get around these attacks. So the fact that the evade system is so radically free, I think is really critical for that to function, because if they did a more Dark Souls style approach, this is why, again, you cannot compare this game to Sekiro with any credibility. If they tried a Sekiro Dark Souls styles approach to the cancel, where you're just locked into your move until it's pretty much finished, you get the situation like in the Souls games where fighting multiple opponents at once is actively bad, and you need to try to avoid that as much as possible. But the idea with a beat 'em up, the idea with God Hand and with these character action games is that fighting multiple opponents at once should be a good idea if you're good at the game. If you know what you're doing, it should be good because then you're locking down multiple enemies, you're keeping them under control, you're keeping them contained, just like in a beat 'em up. So God Hand using this radically free canceling system with its evades, I think is critical to its design. And if you're making a game that's inspired by God Hand, having the moves be able to be canceled like this, I think is foundational. And the canceling system has two benefits. The first I just described with the importance of defensive play and being able to use it to address multiple attackers consistently. But the second use of the canceling system is for offensive purposes, and this is really fun. This is where things get really fun. So not only can you use the cancels to get out of bad situations or to play defensively, you can also use them offensively against single opponents. My favorite example is if you get a big enemy or even a boss up against a wall, you can duck dodge cancel your heavy kick and do this crazy wall loop where you heavy kick, duck dodge, heavy kick, duck dodge, heavy kick, duck dodge. And it creates this really fun rhythm on the stick and with the button where you flick, kick, flick, kick, flick, kick. It feels actually a lot like playing Super Smash Bros. Melee, where you have to use the C stick for a lot of the attacks. And just as a quick aside, I actually really enjoy that the evade system is used on the analog stick. I know a lot of people want their attacks to all be buttons, but I think this innovation of using the stick for attacks is something I've always really liked in games when done well. And I do wish more games, especially action games, embraced this idea. I hate that these days the analog stick, the right stick, I mean, its only purpose and function is just to turn the camera. It's the camera stick. Like I described earlier, you don't need the camera to be fully turning in this game. There are some improvements with it that I'll talk about in the critique section, but overall I love the idea of using the stick for the evades, and I really miss this era of action game design where the developers were a lot more creative and open-minded with how can we map the controls of this game to the standard control scheme. It made your game stand out if it was done really well, and I think in terms of God Hand, the overall concept is really good. So anyway, the offensive pressure of the evade canceling system is what I think is this game's secret sauce. And once you know how to do it, you can't imagine the game being played without it in a really cool way. And it actually reminds me a lot of the turnaround jab lock stun of Sailor Moon and Final Fight, where yeah, it's kind of broken in a lot of ways. Like when you get a single opponent locked down with turnaround jabs, it is kind of broken, but because this is a genre and a style of gameplay that is all about dealing with multiple opponents, I love the idea that if you can isolate an enemy, he is helpless before you. Notice I said he, because this doesn't quite apply to the girl enemies, which is really funny. So one last thing I want to say about the wall loop is that I love how much the wall loop ties into the overall design of the game. Even if this technique isn't exactly intended, which I don't know if it was, it's kind of hard to tell if it was or not, because I can imagine that Mikami would be obviously aware that you can cancel the cooldown of the moves. I mean, he's a talented enough developer, and the game holds together enough that I think he was aware of this, and the God Hand team was aware of this. And there are defensive strategies that bosses and larger enemies will use against the wall loop, where they'll kind of air recover and try to air tech out of it, which I think is intended sort of design. But what I love about it is that if you can line everything up and react really well, you can checkmate bosses and checkmate enemies into like this perfect wall loop, a double loop, where you get them in the corner and you start wall looping them, and then they air tech out, and then you loop their air tech back into the first wall loop. And this is actually quite tricky to set up. And what I love about it is it emphasizes the real spacing of the game. That was something I really appreciate about God Hand, where the 3D terrain, where you are on screen, actually matters a lot, and you have an incentive to push enemies into corners and into walls, just like a fighting game, just like Tekken. How many times have you watched Tekken tournaments and one guy gets the other guy at the wall and it's like, oh boy, he's in trouble now, because if you get someone on the wall in Tekken, it's a horrible disadvantage for them. Same case here with God Hand, not only for the enemies, but also for you. So what can happen is if enemies get you on the wall, a lot of your evades stop kind of working because you're stuck at the wall. They can start overlapping and you can't wiggle out because there's nowhere for you to go. So even for yourself, getting walled and cornered is a big problem. And it creates a lot of really cool meta concepts that usually don't exist in modern action games. For example, I love Devil May Cry, but Devil May Cry has this kind of backwards where in Devil May Cry, the first thing you want to do is run and like stand against a wall. because the wall can limit people from surrounding you, and in Devil May Cry, there's no wall dynamic, so like walls are your friend in Devil May Cry, or in God Hand and in fighting games, it's the complete opposite. So you can get some really fun situations in God Hand where there's a large enemy in the middle of the screen, and you'll launch him and you'll knock him against a wall for wall carry. You're doing wall carry combos in God Hand, and no other action game that I'm aware of quite has this dynamic so pinned down. And I wish more action games would use stuff like this. So the wall system and offensive canceling system of God Hand is top tier stuff. And finally, let's talk about rank. When I first started playing God Hand, and I looked down and I saw that it had not only rank, but a rank bar, my thought was, oh, this is a real game. This is like real shit right here. This is like, he knows what he's doing. It might be a generalization, but at this point, it might be a rule that if you see a game and it has a rank bar, it's good. That's almost like a universal law to some degree, because in order for there to be not only rank, but a rank bar, there's some high level design going on here, because rank, I think, is the most underappreciated concept in all of video game design outright. If this channel was to say what element of game design needs to be taken more seriously and needs to be implemented throughout all of gaming more commonly, it is absolutely rank, because rank accomplishes so much that's otherwise kind of a problem with good game design. Like I said, when talking about the level design and the density of this game, you come into a problem with how do you distinguish between a new player playing the game for the first time and an expert player playing the game for the 5,000th time? How do you present them with the same stage and yet have something that is interesting and engaging for both of them for the most part? Rank is a huge factor in this equation, and this is why when arcade games discovered rank, they're just like, yeah, let's do that. Yeah, this is a really good idea. And there's different ways rank can be made, and there's different versions of rank. Not all rank is the same, and not all rank is equally good. But the idea, the concept is so important. Overall, what I'm saying is rank is amazing, and then the next step of actually displaying the rank, that brings it home. That is like the home run. If there is another critique I have of Resident Evil 4 that I hadn't really thought of until more recently, it's that from what I understand, Resident Evil 4 actually has a rank system, which is why it feels so replayable and fun. But I think Resident Evil 4, the original, the real one I'm talking about, of course, should have a rank graph to display and tell the player, hey, rank is occurring, here's what's happening, because that formalizes it as a gameplay element. And I'm all about formalizing and clarifying elements of a game's design. And God Hand does this pretty damn well, not only by showing you the rank, but then also adding a taunt in, where the more you taunt, the more it raises rank. So you can make the game more difficult on your own by just being like swag like that, and then also gives you meter. So even like the taunting rank meter dynamic of this game is pretty cool, and it does actually lead to meaningful stuff. Like as you play the game and you keep increasing rank, not only do you get more aggressive enemies and harder enemies, but you'll actually get bonus enemy spawns. I love that type of stuff. So it's bringing in extra content, extra things that the expert player is going to address that the novice player isn't going to address, but both of them are happy with the outcome. Because if you're a new player and you're just playing God Hand for the first time, the last thing you want is a double elite enemy spawn right before the boss. You're like, no, I'll just fight the boss, thank you. I don't need double elite enemies spawning. But if you're an expert player who's played God Hand hundreds of times, you're like, yeah, bring it on. I want these double elite enemies to show off, yeah, I can take these things down. So it's a great solution for everyone involved, and it's very counterintuitive to what you would hear in like modern game design talk. Because good game design from a mainstream perspective is the better you play, the easier the game becomes. You're rewarding the player by making the game easier. That's modern game design mentality. The problem with that is the incorrect way to view difficulty, because difficulty is not a punishment, it's a reward. You are rewarded with more difficulty, not punished by it if you're an expert player. If you're looking to play difficult games, you want the game to get harder because difficulty is content. So by making the game easier for the newer player, you're actually, in my opinion, sort of punishing the newer player by making the game easier. But overall, this seems backwards when you're first learning games, but just stop and think about it in the long term. Think about your favorite game of all time that you've played thousands of times. Like when I was a kid, Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo was one of my favorite beat 'em ups, one of my favorite games of all time. And even as a kid, I ran into this problem of, okay, I've set it on hard mode, but I've gotten so good at the game, there's nothing left for me to do. I've just beaten the game, no death to the game. Like there's nothing left. There's not enough content, difficulty-wise, to keep me playing and engaged. I'm actually getting punished for being good at the game. But if Turtles in Time had a rank system and just kept spawning more enemies and making things more difficult as I performed better, then that game would have a lot more longevity, right? Same here with God Hand. But as much as I love God Hand, I think there are some valid critiques of the game, not 3 out of 10 level critiques, or not critiques that most people do where they basically say, hey, just radically change the game. Just make the game into Devil May Cry. That's how you make it better. No, I'm talking about critiques within the framework of what God Hand is trying to do. So let's start with the first most obvious critique, which is basically finish the game. And I don't mean in a gameplay sense, I mean in a production sense. From what I understand, the production of God Hand was kind of under the table and like, we got to get this game done now. And, you know, it didn't have a big budget, didn't have a lot of support. It was a real passion project, which I absolutely respect. But if God Hand was successful and had a sequel, a very clear, obvious improvement for the sequel would be, okay, let's like really flesh out the production here. So make the stages look better, have more elements going on in the environments, just finish the game with that last layer of polish, which I think it is kind of missing. And that is a very valid critique that everyone says about the game. Just compare the production quality and graphical quality of God Hand to Tekken 4. I love Tekken 4 and look at how great and beautiful that game is, even to this day. And I don't think it was really outside the ability of the God Hand team to make something look as awesome as Tekken 4. I think it was more of like, we don't have time or budget, we got to get this sucker done now. So if there was a sequel, just imagine how awesome it could be if it had that like Tekken 4 level of presentation. And I do think people would take the game a lot more seriously. Unfortunately, this is a running trend that's happening with really good action games like Wanted Dead. You know, people don't really take Wanted Dead all that seriously because their production's a little rough. So that layer of polish really goes a long way, and I think God Hand would have benefited from that. My second biggest critique is with the camera and soft lock system. So I'm not saying what everyone else says, which is make the analog stick turn and make it like every other 3D camera system. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is with the way they implemented the camera system of this game, there are just some really obvious polishes they could have added. I think that would have made it better for everyone involved, which is the turning mostly. So like when you're out in neutral just running around, turning's completely fine. But if you need to like turn 90 degrees or like turn 45 degrees or like do these kind of incremental turns or switch targets that are like right next to each other, the game doesn't really have a mechanism that works super cleanly for that. There is kind of an exploit that you can do that kind of makes it work, which is you go for the like special move, and then when it goes into the slowdown, you cancel, and that will like auto turn, and then you can cancel the auto turn, so you can kind of make it work, but that's janky as hell. What they should have done, and it's actually really simple, is made more use of that turning button. So L1, I believe, is the turning button. And if you press that, you'll do a quick turn, 180 turn, just like in Resident Evil 4. You can see the parallel there. But I think with that button, they could have done a lot more. Like, instead of just doing the 180 turn, why don't they have the button do more things? Like, if you pressed left and L1 together, you would like auto turn to the nearest target on your left. And then you press right and L1 together, you'd auto turn to the target on your right. And then if you held it, you could activate a manual quick turning mode. So you're holding L1 and then your default looking speed doubles. So that if you need to quickly turn 90 degrees, you can just hold the button, turn the 90, let it go. So something like that, very simple, but would go a long way towards helping the feel of the turning, because that's basically the only problem with the camera system that everyone kind of agrees on, is like the turning is a little bit unfinished. And then another one that I care about that would never come up in a mainstream review is the scoring system of God Hand. In all tradition of beat 'em ups, is broken and basically useless, because from what I understand, you can infinitely milk the game and there's no timer. So the scoring system is like basically useless. You know, it's just like Turtles in Time. I currently hold the world record of Turtles in Time scoring wise because there's no timer and there's a boss with an infinite milk. So you can just sit there and infinitely milk the boss forever. That's kind of a problem. God Hand suffers from the same issues. And what's interesting is that God Hand, you can tell, is like trying to have scoring be important. Like the game is really emphasizing scoring. The game is showing you score. You have like score screens at the end. So you can tell that the game wants scoring to be a thing. But again, if we had a God Hand 2, if we had a sequel, or if we had games that were inspired by God Hand, that were like it, that came out, fixing the scoring system would be an obvious point of improvement. So that is a little bit unfortunate because there could have been a lot of cool stuff with the scoring system of God Hand. And then another critique I have that is counterintuitive to what the game is normally praised for is its custom skill tree system. I think that system is like a neat inclusion and something that more casual players could get into, but I think the actual execution of it is pretty janky and weird. Like, I don't like the idea that there are just upgradable versions of moves to begin with. Like, you get guard break 1 and then there's guard break 2, and guard break 1 is a piece of shit basically. The second thing about the custom skill tree that is an obvious oversight is the fact that they make certain core moves replaceable. Don't do that. Why would you do that? So like guard break and the launching uppercut, of course you need those to be in your moveset. Of course, those are like core ideas. Imagine if you don't have those and you're dealing with enemies that are guarding. What the hell are you going to do? Guard break, launcher, wall kick, those should be locked in, irreplaceable moves because they are part of your core moveset, and you don't want some poor new player who doesn't really know the game, doesn't really know what to do, accidentally being like, guard break? Nah, I don't need that. Or launcher? Nah, I don't need that. Or the wall kick, this seems kind of slow and lame, but forget that. And then they're just putting in all these other crappy moves in their place. So again, I think the custom move concept and mapping moves customly is a cool idea, but it's not fully realized. Like, they could have gone in and really improved how the system actually works and also communicated to the player a little bit more clearly. No, you really want a guard break, dude. Like, no, keep the guard break. You need this, you know. I think these types of things would really help the game communicate to the player what the game wants it to do. Make sure your core gameplay concepts are as clean and clear as possible. And so my final thoughts on God Hand is that this game breaks my heart a little bit because it is the type of game that I really appreciate, where it's innovative, it's bold, it's difficult, and it has all the right ideas, pretty much. It's like the type of stuff I love to see, but it was not met with any sort of support in its time. It didn't sell well, it reviewed horribly, Clover shut down, so it ended up being just this lost artifact of action game design from mainstream conversation for a really long time. And then of course it had this sort of resurgence with hardcore players years later, but I feel like the damage is done. It's cool that like now these days God Hand has a cool reputation. It's like, ooh, you know about God Hand, you're cool, right? That's great and everything, but I wish it was more successful and respected in its time, because imagine what we lost. We lost God Hand 2, and we lost this blueprint of what I think could have been a really exciting and robust subgenre of action games, you know, real 3D fighting game beat 'em up style stuff. Because even these days you can tell this subgenre, there's like some inclination towards it. People want it. Like when Tekken and these 3D fighters sit around and they think, how do we make single player content for Tekken? It's like obvious, you know, God Hand, this type of stuff would be perfect for that. It's like the perfect fit. It's such a good idea, but unfortunately, no, you know, God Hand is just relegated to hipster design talk on YouTube. So yeah, I love God Hand, obviously, and I encourage you all to play it. You can play it really well in the PS2 emulator. These days, you don't have to get a PS2 to play it well. The PS2 emulator is really hot stuff right now. It works really well. Anyway, I could go on and on about God Hand. I love this game. Go play it, and maybe I'll make a tutorial about how to play it if you all are interested. Let me know in the comments. I'm not YouTubing you. Really, let me know if you want me to make a tutorial about God Hand, because I really will if people want that type of thing. I know I'd have a lot of fun doing it. I just need to make sure people would actually watch the video. So let me know your thoughts on that idea. And so I hope you all enjoyed my review of God Hand, and I hope more action games in the future take inspiration from its design, because it has a lot of really cool visionary ideas that I think have been lost in the sands of time. And if you enjoyed this review, I also recommend checking out my review of Metal Gear Rising, because I think there are a lot of cool parallels between God Hand and MGR. And I mean, Platinum is kind of a successor to Clover in some ways, so it is cool to see the parallel between these two games. So check that out if you're so inclined, and please like, subscribe, tell all your friends. I'm going full-time very soon. September is almost here, so if you're so inclined, I'd really appreciate support on Patreon to help me going full-time, becoming sustainable for the future. Thanks so much, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons: 100, Absconditis, Accepting Panda, Admiral Coconut, Anhold, AJA, Alexander Pfeiffer, Analgesic Productions, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Arrow Viper, Au Alai, Autonamed, B-Lit, Beam Pit, Bo, Beto Dames, Boghog, Board Basmati, Borgie22, Chase Palumbo, Chris Yusufovich, Christopher R, Chronic Burnout 3, Claire Cliff, Clay Binkley, Climby Coyote, Coast, Colorboy, Cooksan666, Cook Some Soup, Des Audio, Dances with Incels, Darren Griffin, Dave Hansen, David Andrus, David Crespo, Delta Tango 6, Dingo, DJ420 Praise It, Drano, Dr. Bosky, Elbin Senisev, Elias Alonso, Eric Houdini, FCK, F Deluxe, Friskin, Frames Per Human, Francisco, Freckle Lord, Full Set, Game Boy Guru, Geese Machine, GPM, Gustavo Sanchez, Harun Khan, Hausu, Hero Death, Hiki Hime, HUD, JDab, Jake Ryan, Jack Walsh, Jacob Valenzuela, JLab, JBRPG, Jeffel, Jink Hans, John Kelly, John Longwalker, Josh Mayer, Jurgen, K, K2, Contain, Praise the Boys, Lord Harrington, Lorraine, Malaise, Mario Simic, Mark Sloan, Mars Bar, Matt O'Leary, Maz, Minung, Meister, Mujam, Milo Shamel, Monroe, Nathaniel Davis, Neon Decker Games, Nile Agitis, Okla Kugels, Powell Parole, Pedro Perez, Poorly Written Protagonist, Psycho Blizzard, Queen Charlene, Ralph Trujillo, Raul, Rapido, Real Skeen, Brent Holtz Time, Retro Schmupper, Rory Starks, Rolf015, Ryan Bartlett, Scanline City, Segfault, Shazzy, Shmup Junkie, Sirapong, Sparta Mad, Spiders STG, Spongy, Steady AI, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Superfunk, Temzarian, Taze Ryu, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, Tim French, Toho Rizardi, Travis Arbon, Tsugumo, 2YU, Twilight EX, Unikoi Roots, Ursua, Ushi Mushi, Vic Viper, Beautiful, Wabby Legs, What Is This, Zachary Patton, Zeal, and Zen Ryoku.